Hey you guys, welcome back to the channel. Hopefully everyone's having a good day. Today we're going to talk about calotypes again. So let's talk about the process that changed photography forever, right? Photography did not begin as something fast and sharp or conventional. It began as an experiment with light and chemistry and patience. One of the most important breakthroughs is the experiment that was called the calotype, a process that quietly transformed photography from a scientific curiosity into a reproducible medium. And today, that's what we're going to walk through. What calotypes are, how they work, and why they matter, and how their legacy shapes photography in today's time. This isn't just a technical process, it was a major turning point. Now, if you want to explore some of these sources behind this video, I'll include the links in the description and you can reference them throughout the video. So, let's start by why the calotype even exists. Well, in the early 1800s, artists and scientists were obsessed with one question. How do we make light permanent? Well, guess what? Well, here's where William Henry Fox Talbot, who was an English scholar and an inventor, he was frustrated with his inability to draw accurately using a camera obscura. Unlike painters, he wanted the image to form itself, and so his early experiments produced what is called a photogenic drawing, where paper was coated with silver chloride, which was darkened when it was exposed to the sunlight, and these images were fascinating, but they were slow, unstable, and they lacked flexibility. And Talbot's major breakthrough came in 1841 when he introduced the calotype process. According to Bracana, the name comes from a Greek kalos, meaning beautiful, and types, meaning impression. Beautiful impression, calotype. And this photography was moving from novelty to a system. So, how were calotypes made? Well, the calotype process was a very complex process and required precision. First, a sheet of high-quality writing paper was coated with silver nitrate, then immersed in potassium iodide, forming silver iodide, a light-sensitive compound embedded into the fibers of the paper. Before the exposure, the paper was brushed with a mix of silver nitrate and gallic acid, creating what Talbot called gallo nitrate of silver. This synthesized the paper and made it ready to capture an image. Pretty much, these chemicals coating the paper in it made it ready to then capture the photo. Now, the paper was then placed into a camera where the exposed light would hit it. The exposure did not produce a fully visible image. Instead, it created a faint or invisible negative. After exposure, the paper was developed using more gallic acid and silver nitrate, and these steps revealed the image gradually, allowing the photographer to watch this image start to emerge. And finally, the image was fixed using a solution such as sodium thiosulfate, so it would no longer react to light, pretty much going through the negative process, and this was the result. Was a paper negative. Now, why did this change everything? Well, here's why the calotype truly reshaped photography. Because the calotype produced a negative, that negative could be placed directly into another synthesized sheet of paper and exposed to light, creating a positive print. This process, called contact printing, allowed photographers to produce multiple images from a single exposure. Now, this was a massive advantage over the daguerreotype, which produced a single one-of-a-kind image on a metal print. Daguerreotypes was a sharp and detailed, but they could not be reproduced. The calotype introduced the idea to photography that could be repeatable, disturbed, and scalable. So you're able to grow this. You can do a lot more prints. And this negative workflow is a direct ancestor of film and darkroom printing. Now, why calotypes look the way they do? Calotypes have a distinct appearance, and it's not accidental. Because of the negative, and it was made on paper, the texture of the paper fibers softened the image. Fine details were often muted, and the edge appeared less sharp than the daguerreotypes, instead of a crisp precision calotype, which emphasized tones and atmosphere and mood. Now, the softness appeared, it was applied to many early photographs, especially portraits and landscape photographers. These images often felt intimate and painterly, if you want to say, because it was blurring the lines between photography and drawing. Now let's talk about artists and the early adoption. Some of the most important early photographers and artists embraced calotypes precisely because of their expressive qualities. For example, David Octavius Hill and Robert Adams. They used this process to create emotionally rich portraits and documentary images in Scotland during the 1840s, and their work demonstrated that photography convey personality, depth, and a narrative rather than simply recording an appearance. And these early calotypes treated photography as a form, not just a scientific tool. Let's talk about the limitations and the decline. Despite its innovation, the calotype had really major drawbacks. First, the paper negatives were limited in sharpness, and exposure times were still relatively long. And perhaps most importantly, Talbot presented this process in English, resulting in its use of adaptation and encouraged other photographers to pursue alternative processes. Eventually, the wet collidine process replaced calotypes, which was offering a sharper images and a faster exposure while retaining the negative process, the negative positive system. But calotypes had already done its job, so we're moving forward. Why do calotypes still matter? Well, the calotype may no longer be used widely, but it influences everything everywhere. The idea that photography begins with a negative, the concept of developing a latent image, the ability to reproduce photographs. All of these trace directly back to Talbot's calotype. And modern film photography and even the logic behind digital imaging process own and contribute to this process. Calotypes throughout the world that photography was just not about capturing light, but about controlling, developing, and sharpening it. So the calotype reminds us that photography did not begin with speed or convenience. It began with curiosity. It began with chemistry and patience. It was messy, it was experimental, and it was imperfect, but it changed history. And if you want to dive deeper into the chemistry or the history and have visual examples of a calotype, explore the links in the description below. And if you like to see the early photographic process connect to modern photography techniques, let me know what you want to explore next. And hit that like button, subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Hopefully you enjoyed this detailed version of calotypes, and I'll see you in the new year.